Now we have the Atlas Waterfront Plan presentation. Phil Boyd with Welsh Comer. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council members.
You have 8 minutes, Phil.
Honey?
5 minutes.
Am I on the clock?
Yep.
Okay, thank you for having me. I know I'm batting cleanup, and it's late, it's getting later. So I'll quickly move through this. We are getting ready to take the project out to bid. And so Bill Greenwood, Tony Burns, Mr. Mayor suggested I come in front of council, just give you guys a kind of a brief rundown of where we're at. So the purpose is just to let you know that we're headed out. The plans and specifications are being finalized, and you all might remember tremendous amount of community input. At some point, the community input stops, and the ink has to hit the paper, and the design effort really starts. And that's what we've been doing for the last 5 months. Pretty intensive effort. It's a very significant project. We'll put it out to bid at the end of August, and the critical path element here to think about is the low water work. Remember, there's a tremendous amount of shoreline stabilization work that needs to occur along the waterfront park area, and that needs to occur during low water, which is right around November 15th. So we're pushing the time frame with which we need to get out to bid. As a side note, on a parallel path, also there's work going on in the master plat and the PUD. We've taken that about as far as we can until we finish the development standards. The development standards will be presented to the Planning Commission in a draft format. One of the things the Planning Commission wanted to know about was, how did the developers feel about this? The development community feel about the project overall? We did a nice presentation here. Councilwoman Miller facilitated it here with developers. We've actually done another survey, and we're soliciting input back from them. So that will inform, that input from the developers will inform the development standards, and then we'll move forward with the master plan and the PUD. We're also just doing general developer outreach, or maybe you might consider it soft marketing, making developers aware of it. And when I say we, I'm referencing Heartland. We've been pretty careful as we have moved into this phase, that there's a little bit of an arm's length relationship between the interface with developers. So it's not city interfacing with developers or Ignite interfacing with developers. It's a consultant. So we kind of keep that separate relationship there. And then we're also working on the draft, the Ignite request for proposal development, because remember, the parcels will be sold off, the blocks will be sold off through an RFP process. And so we're starting to work on the drafting of those RFPs, so the Ignite board can look through them and the criteria that will be used to evaluate proposals as they move forward. So that's happening in addition to this happening. Just a little bit of a refresher back to the project goals. The big one, preserving the waterfront as public space and then stimulating development on the property. That's where that was the entire reason the city purchased the property. It's broken down into two major efforts, the public space development process and the upland or the private space development process. And we're continuing to move through each one of these. I've used this graphic over and over again because it kind of depicts the process that we're working through. The rest of what I'll talk about tonight is right on this side. A little bit about the project meeting history that went into this and the opportunities for public input and reflection. That ended about April, May of this year. And then we've been really focused on the design since then. And the way to think about what we've been doing since then is the public has provided input on things that they like. Gee, we want a dog park, a water dog park. We want access to the water. Once those ideas are established and vetted through the Planning Commission, the Parks and Rec Commission, the City Council, the Ignite Board, and we conclude on those, we move into the design process, and that's really what we've been doing since then. This is actually an excerpt out of the plans. I know it's not as colorful, but this is what plans look like. And you can see it shows the entire site. Lots of words in here about future roads. We depict them in there because they're useful for overall orientation, and we actually reference them in all the design because we're putting this element, the park element, in first. So there will be no road here when the project is completed, The only access will be through Suzanne initially, the large parking lot down here, and then the major feature, which is the trails connecting Riverstone. They come to here, they split. Here it's a single 16-foot wide trail. As you move in this direction, it splits to the waterfront pedestrian gravel trail, and then the paved trail up in this area here. The park area in here, big green space, and then waterfront accesses down in these areas. One of the things that we have done is there's a large number of alternates in this. And so if you think about, there's the base bid and then there's the alternates. The project budget is $6.2 million. We don't know exactly what the construction market is doing. Nobody can predict that right now. It's as volatile as we've kind of seen it in a long time. We're hopeful that actually when we're bidding this, we'll attract lots of contractors to this and we'll see a lot of positive bid results on it. But if we don't, we want council to be in the position to be able to work with Ignite and award a project that fits within your budget, which might be meaning making some tough calls. We might not be able to afford the dog park, or you might have to make some other choices that will be tough. But we wanted you to have that ability to move the project forward.
Is the project portioned out as far as costs, or are you going to just do that if that happens? You know, so if it's like you come to us and you say, hey, the bids came in and they're way high, so you got to cut something out. Do you know what the pieces cost? So
Yes, each one of those alternates will have a price tag to it.
Okay.
And so you'll be able to award a project that fits within your budget, or you may say, gosh, we love it all. Ignite doesn't have enough money, so let's go get some money out of Parks and Rec. I'm not saying you would say that, but that might be one of the choices that you'll be faced with making, because all of these features are, probably are considered needs from some element of your community. So it will be a tough choice, but that's why you're up there.
thanks.
Phil, can you just go back to that other map just for a quick second? So you said this is how it's going to start. It's not going to start with the road coming in and the development. It's going to start on the waterfront.
It's starting on the waterfront, and for a couple of reasons. One, that's obviously has the most public value to the community. The second reason is, once the developers see that the park is real, and they see the quality of it and the amenity that it will be, it drives the value of the dirt up, the land that's for sale. So one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about, because it's evolved since we first started, is the restroom facility, and we can't even really call it a restroom facility, so we gave it a new name. We called it a recreation support building, because we couldn't think of any other name. But that is the recreation support building, which houses a number of uses. One, it houses the restroom. Two, it's a picnic shelter. Three, it has an irrigation pump station in it to draw water out of the Spokane River to irrigate the park. And fourth, there's a kind of a storage area over here that could be used for some other potential uses in the future. But it was a part of the building that it just kind of lent itself to have some space in there. Right in this area right here, you'll see another, it's a setback, and I'll show you a plan view of it. And it's where you guys currently shut the restrooms down in the wintertime, but you still need to provide facilities there. And so Bill Greenwood cleverly came up with this idea of let's find a place that we could slip the porta potty in there, kind of in a nice location. So that area will accept a ADA porta potty in there for wintertime use. You can see the theme of the building is obviously mill style. This is the view looking at the picnic shelter. This is another view of the picnic shelter, much taller structure, open, nice feeling to it.
Phil, is the design of the building, the support building, is it based on anything historical or that was in the mill, or?
This is the look of that building actually came off of some pictures that Bernardo Wills Architects used from some of the original mill structures.
Cool.
That kind of theme is consistent with this clear story element up here in the buildings that used to be used for ventilation and light. Mm-hmm. And so here you can see that there's nothing in it. These are vents in this section of it.
Nice, thank you.
This is just the east elevation of the building. And here's the plan view. The reason that I show this is the building originally started out with two toilets on the women's side and a urinal and a toilet on the other side. And as we worked through the design process and Bill Greenwood really got into it and was experiencing what's happening at Memorial, it went to 3. And then as we continued looking at the uses potentially that might happen down here, it went from 3 to 4. Obviously, that has a cost associated with it. So this is going to be driving the project cost up. When we originally estimated the project, we put contingencies in there because it's so early in the process. You have to have a contingency. We've probably burned through a good portion of the contingency, making this a bigger facility, but as Bill pointed out, you do these once, you don't have another opportunity to do the restrooms correctly. And so Bill was pretty adamant that we take him to this size. This is the picnic shelter portion of it, and then you can see what looks like a tremendous amount of piping in here, which because it is the facility that draws water out of the Spokane River and pumps it into the irrigation system. And I won't get into the details of it, but the whole purpose is you have a water right that Terry Pickle is securing. It's cheaper than buying water from Terry Pickle for the Parks Department. And so at this time, it makes sense to make the investment there. Here's the storage room I mentioned, and then this is the ADA restroom area. Other facility that will be here is the maintenance storage facility. Bill has the option of dragging all his toys with him to the park from elsewhere in the city, or if he could keep them here, it's more efficient for his crew to go there and get the toys out and go maintain the park. Pretty simple structure. It's a pole building, 30 by 50. It started bigger, and Bill kept shrinking it down in order to try to help offset some of the additions he was making in the restroom facility. Literally, it's a pole building with a flat slab on the inside of it, so it's as vanilla as they come. A little bit of an architectural interest there because it does front out towards, you'll see it as you come into here, and it's in a neighborhood here, so putting a really ugly building wasn't appropriate for the rest of the development. This is just another view of the ad alternates that might be a little bit easier to see. We had to name these things, and they kind of have, this one feels like a grotto. This is a water access down here. This is the inlet where they used to actually pull logs out. And you can see all these different ad alternates in here. When we open up the bids, you will see pricing for each one of those. We'll have a total, and then you'll be faced with the tough choices. Hopefully not. Maybe the bids will come in great and we'll be super pleased with it, which would be wonderful, and we'll just award everything. Schedule-wise, this is a pretty detailed schedule because it has a lot of stuff that we need to do with Renata. And you guys know the ship that Renata runs is very tight, and so we have to make sure we have things that say staff report to Renata and all these good things. And so we're trying to make sure we're on task. We'll advertise on the 27th. We'll advertise on the 29th, and then we'll open bids on the 24th of September. Tony and I talked about how do you deal with this situation where council is going to award the project, but Ignite's providing the funding. How does Ignite provide input to council? And so the idea was to have that Tony can have a special call meeting with his board on the 30th of September or the 1st of October, right in here, and then they could provide some input to council, at least on Ignite, the Ignite board's thoughts, before you all get ready to actually take action on it. And then the other kind of key component of this is Bill Greenwood will have opportunity to talk to the Ignite board, because Bill is obviously channeling your Parks and Rec Commission, who from the early onset, the mayor had said, that's really who should be driving this bus, because that's where they live, is in the Parks and Rec world, and advising council. We'll move into notice to proceed, and then probable low water and the shoreline work would start in November. We probably will have low water, depending on the year, from November to February. And the contractor will be primarily focused on that, but they may do other work as well, depending on weather. It could be that the above-ground work, upland, doesn't start until the spring. Objective is to be finished by July 2020. So that is a quick run-through of it, and I hope that gives you enough information, but I'm glad to answer any questions.
Phil, if you would, just briefly talk about the groups that you pulled together to talk about the shoreline stabilization, because I know you have reached out to a number of groups to talk about the shoreline and what's best to be done there, and maybe just briefly talk about, because I know you've brought in a lot of people to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. The shoreline stabilization I think the council members have probably seen the classic shoreline stabilization where there's riprap kind of laid on a slope, kind of flattened like that. We could do that through here, but we'd have to cut all the trees down. And when we were working through or most of the trees, I should say, when we were working through the community meetings, one of the values that we heard from the community is, gosh, we just love the trees through here. I hope you'll save all of those. It is a real challenge to save those trees, but also stabilize the shoreline from erosion. As we got into the early design process, it's a complex of enough situation through here because you have the river, wakeboard wakes, the surfboat wakes, and the up and down of the river, that it was beyond our engineering skill set. So we brought in a coastal engineer from the west side who does this routinely and developed rockery riprap, which it is just kind of what it sounds like. It's rock stacked on top of each other. It's a little more complex to build, but it allows you to preserve the trees. In the process of doing that, before we got to that conclusion, we first engaged the Corps of Engineers, DEQ, Department of Lands, KEA, the Coeur d'Alene Tribe. I think that there's one more in there, Avista, in order to get their input on it. The idea is that, Coeur d'Alene gets the chance to do this once because it's really hard for you guys to go back and spend money maintaining expensive facilities. So the idea is to do it right here, create a demonstration project that all those entities can point to. The tribe was super involved with providing input and what they thought was important there. And obviously the trees and the environment and keeping the water cooled was important. And so that's why there was so much effort put in that shoreline stabilization segment of the project. It's easily been the hardest part of the project to design and figure out how to build cost effectively.
Phil, along those lines, when you look at that type of riprap that's set up to save the trees, does it fit in the budget?
Yes. Well, let me back up. No, that is one of the hiccups. Remember, we went out and pursued, when I say we, Ignite, pursued a grant through the Restoration Partnership. It was the very first year that Restoration Partnership was offering money. We applied for $1.2 million, and they said, no, you don't make the cut. So we applied for $1.2 million to build that shoreline stabilization. Currently in the budget is $250,000. So we've revised the design a little bit to try to cut back the cost of it. And our current estimate on it is it's just pushing $1 million. So the project is $750,000 in the hole immediately from a budget standpoint. And when I mentioned earlier the contingencies that we were going to dip into, we dipped into some of that, but what it also forced us to do is actually go back and, without getting into too much detail, start redesigning some of these streets to minimize some expenses that we had up in here, earthwork expenses, and to use that money to offset our shoreline offset over here. Because our approach to it is, you guys have given us one budget to work from, and that's what we're trying to do. So you end up getting forced back and looking at some of the early decisions, say, well, gosh, we would love to build Atlas at a really gentle slope in here, but we can't afford to do that. So it's going to be a little steeper slope in here, which isn't great. It still meets all the codes and standards, but it will allow us to save a bunch of earthwork money that can be used down in this area. So those are the trade-offs you end up going through on a project like this.
So when you talk about alternates in my head says it's more than what is normal. Not in this case, is that correct?
Not in this case. Maybe the way to think about it is we're trying to give you a tool to be able to award a project. The worst case scenario for us is the council to open up bids and it be over budget, and you say, it's over budget, go back and redesign the thing. Well, that's frustrating for everybody. And what we want to be, and we can't predict the construction market. So what we want to be able to do is to provide the council with a menu, and you now get to make the choices of saying, okay, here's what our budget is. we like all these things, do we figure out how to add more to our budget, or do we cut something out? And that's where Bill Greenwood's input in Parks and Rec Commission will be important, because he'll be able to say things like, I could add that later, I can't add this later, I need to have this now, because it would be so difficult. So that's the idea of the alternates, is more of a tool for awards.
Every time I heard alternate, I go,
Yeah.
oh my.
Kiki?
So in those add alternates that you have, are they prioritized by number based on significance of how easy it is to do, or public input, or timing? They're
Not
just
not
at
in
all.
this configuration. When we come before council, we will provide those recommendations and a snippet of information on, here was the feedback we received on water access, very important to the community. You can't really build it later. And each one of those would have some criteria for you all to consider. They're not in this one, they're just randomly numbered here.
So just housekeeping, remind me, when the bids are open and the low bid is the base bid, but does the low bid plus the total of the chosen add alternate still have to be the low bid?
That's a question I'm going to be working through with that gentleman over there.
That's going to be important to know before we
Yep, yeah.
get into this discussion.
Yeah, because, and honestly, the answer is in all the different cities I work with, different city attorneys interpret that differently. And so it boils down to, we have a philosophy on how we think it should be done, but different city attorneys seem to give me different direction on it. So that's one of the things we'll talk to Mike about.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is how you write your specs or write the bid process. And so if you alert people to, this is how we're going to work through that, then they know, and that's the rules. I think where
That's why I
it
asked
gets
about the
problematic
priority
is
list.
if you haven't really set out any rules,
Right.
and then you go, oh boy.
Yeah.
So,
And we put the language in the bids, what the basis of award will be, but we'll work through it with Mike and his team to make sure it fits their objective or requirements.
Anything else for Phil?
Thanks, Phil.
All right, thank you very much,
Thank you, Mr.
appreciate it.
Mayor.